Hello, welcome. If you're back or if you're new, thank you in any case for clicking in. I'm Olivia. I am about to tell you a story about my trip down to Machu Picchu in 2021 with my friend and travel companion Angel. If you want to know about how we met and started doing all these travels together, you can click over to this video. Otherwise, just sit back and let's start the story. So I went down to my second trip to Peru in October of 2021. This was basically Peruvian spring, winter going into spring because they're on the other end of the equator from us. So one of the things we were worried about was the weather, because the best times to visit Machu Picchu is actually more like in our springtime, so like March or so, towards Peruvian summertime, because there's a little bit more of a risk for cloud cover, just so you know if you're someone interested in going yourself. But we got pretty lucky. We'll get more to that later. Let's go back to me actually going down. So I went to my favorite Miami airport again. Well, my favorite airport, which is the Miami airport. It was a stopover from the flight from my capital city down to Lima. And this time I took Taxi Green again. Taxi Green is my favorite little taxi company down there. To be honest, I haven't really tried any other ones from the airport in Lima, but Taxi Green won my heart because the girls have those really cute little dresses. I wish I could go down there to work there just to wear those cute little dresses. So the first night, Angel and I couldn't meet up because he was actually still doing his job. He had managed to get some time off work. That's why it took us a while to plan. Well, two reasons it took us a while to plan. This is a lesson for you because this is totally still a thing, even though it's not as bad as it was at the time because it's now full capacity at Machu Picchu again. If you want to go to Machu Picchu, you need to get your tickets ahead of time. We thought we could buy them like the week before, and we ended up having to reorganize the whole trip and our vacation times and everything. That's how we ended up going in October instead of, I think we had originally planned for September. Anyways, I was there now. Angel had his time off, but he was working that night, so I stayed in Miraflores, the nice part of Lima, in a little hostel. Actually, I love this hostel. I have stayed there multiple times. When I go down to Peru, it's my go-to now. It's called Peruana. I'll put their link for the Lima hostel down in the description below. They also have a hostel in Cusco that I've never been to and can't speak to, but if it's anything like the Lima one, 10 out of 10 recommend. So I hung out at Peruana that night. They even had a little restaurant because I still was a little bit wary about going out on my own at this time because this was only my second trip down to Peru, my third trip abroad. My first trip abroad was London, which is a very different vibe than Latin America. And I was still working on my Spanish. I had been learning and I felt like my Spanish was better than my first trip down to Peru, but it still wasn't really there yet either. So I was just like, I don't know. I don't want to get lost. And then, something happened. Oh, scratch that, y'all. That all happened after I got back from Machu Picchu. But I wanted to keep in all those nice things I said about Peruana. So I went to Peruana, but it was after we came back from Cusco. Before Cusco, I really wanted to watch the sunset over the beach, and you couldn't do that when I was in Lima in July because it was all cloudy from Peruvian winter and the special cloud phenomenon that happens in Lima. So what I did for that night was to rent an apartment with a balcony, and I got to watch the sunset. So that was really cool. But Angel had invited me to his family's home to eat dinner with them, so I didn't even end up staying in that apartment that night. I took a shower because I already kind of had the feeling I would probably just stay at their house because of how far away it was, my apartment versus their house. And I was like, I don't know, we might just end up leaving out from his house instead of this apartment. But I did take a shower there because he had told me a little bit about how the house was set up, but I wasn't sure whether or not I would be comfortable taking a shower, especially because his brothers and dad are there too. So I was just like, I'll just take a shower before. We shared one of the cookies from my hometown again. That's one of our traditions now whenever we meet up. I think we've always had one of those cookies every time we've met up. Then it was time to go to Angel's house, and I was so excited because he lives in one of those hillside communities that I had told you about in one of the previous videos, which is more of a Latin America developing world vibe versus like Miraflores, which is basically downtown Miami. And then the place I was at wasn't technically Miraflores, but it was basically Miraflores, and I didn't really go out because it was just a residential area. So we take the taxi up to his neighborhood, and then we just get off on the street, because the thing is, you don't actually have direct street access to a lot of these kinds of houses. There's a stairway path slash walking path that you take to actually get up there. So we did a little hike, and then there's this little house with a little small garden outside, or really just a couple of plants. But I see his mom, and she greets me, and I get to go into the house, and he kind of gives me the tour. He's like, oh, here's the living room, and the dining room, and the kitchen, and the upstairs is where all the bedrooms are. And it was so special to me because we had been video chatting at this point for like almost 9 or 10 months, and I had seen pieces of this before, but this is like something coming to life for the first time. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, this is real. And I got to go up to his room, and from his room I got to see the beautiful view of the nighttime sky and just nighttime landscape of all the little houses twinkling on the hillside. And it was just so magical. It literally felt like I had been reading something in a storybook, and all of a sudden it's right there in front of me. I got to have dinner with his family. His mom had made us. It was, like I had said in my last video, Peruvian staples are like chicken and rice. It was basically that, chicken and potatoes, and I think there might have been some rice. She offered me wine, and I felt really bad because it was peach wine, and I just straight was like, no, that's okay. I had some presents for them too that I gave them at that point. It was just some more American food. Like, I think I had brought some more sodas that Angel had told me his family liked, and that he had liked, and of course more of those cookies so everybody could have some. And then they, invited me to spend the night, or at this point I think we already knew I was going to be spending the night. So I was going to stay in Angel's room, and Angel was going to stay with his brother in his brother's room. And I literally didn't even want to go to sleep because I just wanted to keep staring out the window. I think that I stood in front of that window for a solid 15-20 minutes, just smiling with tears almost coming out my face, being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I actually get to see this in real life. How special is this? It made me think of that song from, I don't even remember the band's name anymore, but that song Fireflies. If you were around for the 2000s, you probably remember that. I even made a video of it and posted it on my Instagram with that song, but then they took it down for copyright. Isn't that a bummer? Copyright stuff. I'm trying to be so careful with that on here. Then I did eventually sleep because we had to be awake really early for the airport in the morning, and I was like, you have to sleep at least a little bit. I wake up to this noise, and I'm like, what in the world is that? It's terrifying. It kind of sounded like nightmares I used to have of just hearing a bunch of people screaming all at once. And I could not fall back asleep because it was distressing for me. I was just like, what in the world is that? But nobody in the house was up or moving around, so I just, look out the window, and I'm wondering, what is that? And I don't know how long it took me to realize that it was just roosters. There were so many roosters. It was probably at least 1,000 roosters or hundreds of roosters cawing at the same time for the morning time, and the sun was barely coming up. And I was just like, well, I'm probably not gonna fall back asleep because that noise is too much for me. So I went downstairs, and at that point it was only Angel's mom who was awake. So I was talking to her for a while. My Spanish was still relatively limited, but it was a lot better than my last time down there. She doesn't speak any English. He's the only one in his family that really can speak a good bit of English. But we were conversing as good as we could, and I was trying to explain to her that the roosters had woke me up. But for some reason, I couldn't remember the name for rooster. I did remember, though, the name of a Peruvian dish called ají de gallina, and I knew that gallina was hen. So I literally said, esposa de la gallina, and that's wife of the chicken. Husband of the chicken. I was like, the husband of the chicken woke me up. And she did understand what I was saying. She thought it was really funny. Then Angel comes down. It's already about time for us to get back to the neighborhood my apartment was in, because I hadn't brought all my things. I just brought enough to, have overnight clothes and maybe brush my teeth in the morning. That was it. Hi, it's editing Olivia. So I realized that now that I've switched over to the camera, because before I was filming on my phone, I was like, why does it not look as good? And I realized, because I'm still learning how to use a camera, that I needed to change the lighting settings and the temperature settings. It looks a lot better now, doesn't it? I need cooler temperatures. But anyways, so that's why you're going to notice a change in the colors mid-video. Sorry about that. All right, let's get back to the story. It kind of feels like twilight now, but we'll just keep playing with the colors. For now, we're sticking with this color for the rest of the video. We were to the part where we were about to go to the airport. The airport was exceptionally exciting this time around, because it was my first time flying with Angel, and it was also his first time flying ever. He really loved it. He always looks forward to flights now, because that's one of his favorite things, is going up in a plane. We get to Cusco, and it was really cool for both of us, because Angel, as a Peruvian, he's like, oh my gosh, this is part of my culture and heritage that I'm finally getting to experience. And for me, it was exciting, because I was seeing that part of Peru that everybody was always talking about and asking me about whenever I told them I went to Peru over the past 2 months, and couldn't really tell them about it because I hadn't been there. So we spent one night in Cusco in a beautiful hostel with a rooftop view. And then it was time for us to go down to Aguas Calientes. It is called, I believe now it's been changed to Pueblo Machu Picchu, but when we went, it was still called Aguas Calientes. And I was traveling with Angel, who is very cheap, and his budget was literally like 10 to 15% of the one I was thinking of having. So when we would split hotel rooms, it was based on his budget. So we were getting like $10 to $15 a night hostel rooms. His only thing was that he did want them to be private. He was willing to spend the extra money to make sure his stuff was secure. But on that note, there's multiple ways to get to Machu Picchu. So you can take a train, and there's multiple levels of train. There's like luxury and then just regular. But the train is always pretty expensive. At the time, we were looking at $75 for a one-way ride. There's apparently a cheap train that you can take if you're a Peruvian, but you have to be in Cusco for it. And obviously we weren't going to be there in time for Angel to be able to get that ticket. So what we agreed on was that we would take the train back from Cusco, or from Aguas Calientes back to Cusco, so that we wouldn't lose a whole day, because it was going to be a day's journey taking the route that we took. What we did was we took a colectivo, which is basically a van that's modified into a bus, like a small bus. We took one all the way to Hidroelectrica, And from Hidroelectrica, you can go by train the rest of the way because there is a station, or there's a trail you can walk. Of course, we walked the trail because Angel is cheap, and I wanted the experience. There's something called the Inca Trail that one of my mom's friends had actually done, and that's what a lot of people around me were thinking when they thought of Machu Picchu, is that you hike up to it, which isn't necessarily the case and wasn't what we were doing, but that gave me something closer to the experience. I had overpacked like crazy again though. So this is the bag. It is the only luggage I brought down the second time, after having brought 2 suitcases and a pretty large carry-on. But it's pretty versatile. It's from Tortuga. Again, not sponsored by anybody, just letting y'all know what the brand is. We'll open this up to the main. So there's a front little side pocket where you could put phones or documents. And then there's this middle pocket, which could be good for a laptop and things like that. It opens up to midway. It also has some mesh that's pretty useful. Then for the main compartment, it basically is set up like a suitcase. It's very formed. Honestly, now that I've been on a larger backpacking trip and chosen a different backpack, I don't really like this super formed version. It makes it overly bulky to me. But it did make packing simpler as someone who was a new backpacker. So yes, just this film to the side, and then the main portion that's like a suitcase, and some little places that you could put. I used them for socks and underwear. That was pretty useful. There is one more compartment off to the back. You have to be careful about how you use this one because it's extra storage, but if you do it wrong, it can make the back bulky. But basically, you know, there's space here for a laptop and just more mesh for whatever you would like to use that for. I'll try to put, it's called Tortuga Outbreaker. I'll try to put a link down in the description for a place that you could get it if you want to check it out. Alright, back over to the regular filming area. That backpack I showed you was just bulging at the seams. I had the whole 5 extra pairs of underwear, 3 extra pairs of shirts, not that many liquids because it was a carry-on, but it was ridiculous. And I didn't realize just how heavy the bag was until I started having to do, I believe it was like a 3-hour hike, 3 to 4 hour hike to Aguascalientes. And Angel ended up having to switch bags with me because even with his camera gear, his backpack was a lot lighter. To be fair, I was packed for a couple days in Lima afterwards, and he was only packed for that and didn't have to worry about bringing any extra stuff because he was just traveling domestically, whereas I was traveling internationally. I was still being extra though. And the bag was just awkward, like I was telling you whenever I was showing it. It's not very I think ergonomic is the right word. I've found more ergonomic backpacks since then. The concept of it being like basically a suitcase you put on your back is cool, but not for when you're backpacking with it. So Angel's carrying that bag for me. I'm carrying his. I'm still having a hard time. And I was frustrated with myself because I thought that I had prepared well, but what I hadn't thought about was the fact that I was just walking. I was like, I did 10,000 steps a day, but I was just walking, and I was walking on smooth paved ground after work, basically, to get my steps in. And now we're on a trail that's every now and then smooth, sometimes not so smooth, and we're like 4,000 plus feet up. I had never been at altitudes like that before, and I underestimated the difference that could do to physical activity. We did eventually make it though. It was great. It was very satisfying. Angel was a little frustrated because I was moving so slow, even with him taking my backpack. We got there after dark and we ended up having to use our cell phone lights to get to the last little bit. There were also some really sweet guys from Nigeria that we had run into who were walking a little bit ahead of us, and they slowed down a little so that we could be following their light at least. But it was really cool when we finally got to the village itself. And we already had a hotel booked. We had booked a somewhat nicer one that had a balcony overlooking the river that goes through the town. We rested so good, especially Angel. That poor guy, we get to the, up to the room, he throws the backpack down and fell onto the bed and just immediately passed out. And I felt so bad. I was grateful that he did that for me, but I felt so bad that I had overpacked and that I wasn't strong enough to carry my own bag. So that was a lesson I took away to better prepare myself for future trips. The next day it was time to go to Machu Picchu. At the time a guide was necessary, but you didn't necessarily book them out ahead of time. What we did was there's a bus that takes you from Aguascalientes or Pueblo Machu Picchu up to the actual entrance. And when you're waiting in line for the bus, there's people offering to be a guide. And when you get to the actual entrance, there's people offering to be a guide. We took a guide that was offering us down by the bus. And when he saw us, I think he saw me and was like, got especially interested in us. He didn't speak English though. He didn't speak English to the point that when I said something to Angel in English, he didn't recognize that we were talking in English. He asked us what language we were speaking. And I was just like, okay, but that's fine because Angel will translate for me. We get up there and it hit me that I was about to see my first world wonder. I was super excited. Another exciting thing was that at the time there was reduced capacity. So it was not as crowded as what you would probably think of it or have seen from it from before 2020, because in 2021 there were still those restrictions on how many people could come in. So we were going to get a less crowded view, and the weather was actually good that day. We were lucky. It wasn't a cloudy day. It was a beautiful sunny day, perfect for pictures. And we had our guide there who was very ready and happy to be getting lots of pictures for us because this was an Instagram moment for both of us. As we're walking through the site, there was, okay, so now Machu Picchu has routes. At the time, I'm pretty sure there was basically only one route. You couldn't even go to Huayna Picchu at the time. Now you can. If I ever go back, I would love, you know what I would love? I would love to go and be able to go one route, then another route, then another route. Because most people, you only get one pick and you have to pick very carefully. Some parts were actually kind of scary. You were walking along a stairs that were directly cliffside. At one point I thought Angel was going to fall and be like a modern Incan sacrifice. I was like, please don't fall. And there were llamas. And I love them so much. They were hard to take selfies with though. I wanted a selfie with one and my guide kept being like, be careful, they spit. And I was like, okay, I guess I should just back off now. We got lots of beautiful pictures. My hair was a freaking mess though, but I was still so proud. I posted some pictures. I had a cute little poncho that I had bought my first day down in Lima that I wore for my photo shoot. It was a really nice blue color. I still have it somewhere, but it's not with me right now for me to show you. So after we got to thoroughly enjoy Machu Picchu, we still had 2 days that we were going to be up in Cusco. We took the train back from Aguascalientes to Cusco. I'll try and put that train link down below in case that's the mode you decide to go. It's also pretty easy to find resources because a lot of people take that train as a time-saving resource. It was cool because on the train, Angel and I actually didn't get put together, so I got to meet another traveler who happened to also be a United States citizen, but he was Mexican heritage, so he had a unique perspective on all these things,
and he was kind of making fun of me for my special traveling pills, basically telling me, hey, chill out. I'm American too, and I can eat all these things. I've gone to fresh fruit markets and been perfectly fine. And his voice kind of stayed in the back of my head, or kind of encouraging me to be braver in future journeys. So that was great. Then we get back to Cusco. We don't get much rest because we have to go on a hike early in the morning. I also didn't sleep very well because, well, for one, we got in late, and I was starting to be woken up to another third world reality check. So I had talked about in a previous video how, I didn't grow up with central heat and air, but I was used to expecting that from hotels and places where I traveled to because it was kind of like a higher standard. And I learned in Peru that even in a lot of nicer places, you don't necessarily expect to have heat. And now we're staying in all these cheap little places because, I was going down to Angel's budget for things. So it definitely didn't have heat. But we had been having hot water, and I always took hot water as something for granted. Everywhere I had ever been, even in my house that didn't have heat, we had hot water and a heated bathroom. So even just not having a heated bathroom was a bit of a change for me. Well, we get to our next hostel that we're going to be staying at for the rest of our stay in Cusco, and I get to the shower and I'm like, something's wrong, there's no hot water. And I have Angel come in and he's looking at it being like, yeah, I think you're supposed to pull this or this, but we couldn't figure it out. And the hotel lady said, oh, it's that a lot of times we run out of hot water, we might have some tomorrow. So I had to take my first cold shower at 23 years old, and I was not happy about it. I got unreasonably upset. Like sad upset, like I was being very just whiny and everything, and that's when I earned the nickname Princesa, which was not a positive thing. It was to be like, oh, kind of out of touch first world princess that's expecting everything to be like in her home country. And so now if we're on trips and I start getting like too whiny or too much like that, I'll even say to myself, quit being princesa. But yeah, it was just, I was not used to just staying cold like that. The food was lukewarm at best most of the time. It was good, but it wasn't like hot, like how I'm used to eating my food. I'm one of those people that I pop my food back in the microwave just to make it like extra hot. And now the food is lukewarm. I'm freezing. It's this damp cold that gets down into your bones. And once the sun goes down, there's no getting away from it until you wake up the next day, especially with the cold water. So, I took my cold shower, I was being a whiny princesa, and then I just curl up under the covers and shiver until I finally fall asleep. Then we wake up, it's early in the morning, we go running down the steps of Cusco to get to our first tour, which was Laguna Humanite. What we were doing for our hiking strategy was to do the lower altitude hike first and the higher altitude hike, which would be Rainbow Mountain, second. I almost died on both of them. Laguna Humanite was the one I was really wanting to do. And they ended up having me get a pony, I think, for both of those. I did not want it. I was saying, no, I don't need a pony. I don't need a pony. And Angel and the guide both were just like, look, please, because you're not going to be able to make it back down. And also you're not going to make it all the way up to actually enjoy it because you're not able to keep up. I was so embarrassed. This is another thing that I always go back to it and remember it to motivate myself to be gymming better before trips, because I like to do these active things for trips, but with my lifestyle here in the States, it's hard to stay in good enough shape to be ready for those kinds of things. So that's another little travel tip. If you didn't know it already, expect to be more active than you are here if you're a United States person. And just gym it up. Focus on that cardio, but make sure you're doing some strength training too if you're planning to, backpack and stuff like that. But so that your friends don't have to carry your backpack for you and you're not super slow. Both the hikes were great though, besides me being embarrassed about being super out of shape. And Rainbow Mountain was pretty brutal at the top. It was 15,000 feet up, super cold, you could actually feel that it was more difficult to breathe. And the tour company didn't want us up there for more than a certain amount of time because it could actually get dangerous because how quickly we went that high up from the hike and everything. We got to get that one of those iconic shoots with an alpaca. That was really great. And then we headed back, and it was time for our last meal in Cusco already. And this is where Angel and I had our first fight because he was being uber cheap and I was wanting to eat, local foods. I was eating so much cuy, I was eating alpaca, and just all kinds of traditional Peruvian dishes. And the last day we get there, we're both kind of tired. We're like, well, what are we going to eat? Angel looks over and there's a KFC in the square. And I was just like, no, my last food here is not going to be freaking KFC. I'm in Cusco, Peru. We have KFCs in America. And he's like, and finally, I was just like, okay, whatever, fine. But I wasn't happy about it. We made up by the time we were eating the KFC overlooking Cusco and everything, but that was our first fight. And it's funny because now I feel like a lot of times if we're fighting, we go find a KFC regardless of whatever country we're in and eat it almost as a makeup thing. The flight back was beautiful because it was actually a clear night in Lima, so we landed getting to see all the city lights. Angel stayed with me in Peruana, that hostel I talked about towards the beginning, because it was just, by the time we got out the airport, it was kind of late for him to try to get all the way back home because it can be hard to get a taxi all the way into his neighborhood due to where it's located, almost on the outskirts of the city. And then the next morning, I, went down with him into the square while he got his ride. I went back up. It was time for me to take my first warm shower in a while. But before I did, I just kind of sat on the bed and I did start crying that time. Angel was more emotional, as far as I know, the first time that we said goodbye. This time I was the more emotional one, even though neither of us showed it to each other. And this time it was more emotional for me because it was like, oh my gosh, I just had this awesome, great adventure with somebody. And now I don't know when or if or how I'll ever see them again because we saw Machu Picchu. When else are we gonna, see each other? Because we live two worlds totally apart. So that was pretty sad. I didn't expect myself to get that sad about that, but I definitely did. But then I took a nice hot shower, chilled the heck out, said, okay, I'm gonna enjoy my last days. I had my last days here in Peru. That sounded kind of ominous. Anyways, I had planned some trips with I guess you could call it an organization / company called Guru Walks. They're great. I 10 out of 10 recommend. I'll put them down in the description. But basically the concept is that there's locals who offer kind of more low budget tours that are just walking tours of their city. And usually the idea is that it's supposed to be free, although you'll find a lot of tours where they take you places that you have to pay entrance fees for. They should tell you in the description, but depending on the country, you have to be extra careful. Anyways, ideally, you just at the end give the guide a tip depending on what you think they earned. And also, please do it depending on what is fair in the country. Don't assume that just because you're in a country where the money's worth a little bit less, you can tip them like $1 and that's fair. Do a little bit of research first about, what the average daily pay or monthly pay is there so you can get an idea of how much money is worth. Maybe even ask them what a typical tip for them is. Went off on a little rant there, but just had to say it. Anyways, I had 2 different tour guides for Guru Walks. I had one where I chose him twice because he was going to locations I wanted to go to, but then Angel had told me I really shouldn't go to on my own as a tourist and someone who still didn't have the best Spanish proficiency. And then another with a lady she was actually an aspiring actress who had been in a couple of commercials that she showed me. It was really cool. She took me to, I don't think I mentioned it in this video, but in my prior videos, I mentioned that beautiful lit up cross they have in Torrijos. She took me there. I got to see a fisherman's market. That was very cool. And I got to see a place overlooking the city. Loved all of it. The other guy I didn't enjoy so much. Our personalities didn't mesh, and I felt like he wasn't very responsive when I was like, oh, these are the kinds of things I want to I would like to see, or if I was kind of expressing that I wasn't interested in something, he still wanted me to take pictures with it, I guess for him to be able to put on his profile of look at all the stuff. There were some pictures where you could just tell I was so done. Let me see, I might put one up, even though I'm embarrassed by how done I look. But like one part, we were in this cemetery, which was some famous cemetery. We were going there on a stop on the way to Chinatown, which is where I actually wanted to go. And it was so hot, and we still had to wear the masks. I ended up getting a mask pattern sunburn because of this day. There was even a lady basically having a heat stroke in that cemetery because all the cement and everything and the sun blazing down on you, and there was almost nowhere to go for shade. I was just so hot. I was just like, okay, I want to be respectful of the dead and everything, and I understand that this is culture and heritage, but I'm really not feeling this. Can you just like give me the highlights and us go somewhere where there's shade and a cold drink? The last day, I also had a pretty rough experience that I am making a whole separate video on, in part because I feel like a lesson can be taken out of it, and also because I feel like it would drag down the whole mood of this video. I'm planning to publish that Thursday, so it should already be out. I'll put it up here. Trigger warning before you even click over, but especially if you're a woman who wants to be doing some solo female travel, I think it could be useful for you to go over and watch. So right over there. But stick around here first and just hear my last little bit about Peru. So Peruana was great till the last day. They even helped organize my taxi out of the city, to the airport. And I did get to have besos frances again and keep my tradition. And then it was time to go. See, you didn't even have to stick around that long. I hope you have a beautiful weekend and come back next Friday. Bye. Hi. If you are still here, oh my gosh, you get to be nominated as one of my new internet/YouTube besties. But anyways, I really hope it wasn't too noticeable that last little section after Machu Picchu was, or one, a little bit rushed, and also a different day. But what had happened was that I could tell on my filming day that I was starting to get sick, so I filmed a lot of things ahead of time. I did a little bit of batch filming. I was so proud of myself. And then when I went to put it on the camera, for some reason, I had 2 files that corrupted. If you guys have any advice on that, if y'all are like more camera savvy people than me, it's for a Canon EOS. I don't know, and I couldn't find any clear answers, so I'm like, okay, we're just gonna bang out another recording. But it was so frustrating. Oh my gosh, I lost like a whole hour of work. Anyways, I'm still learning. I'm drinking my tea. I'm trying to make sure that I'm gonna be like able to talk halfway decent for this last little section. Hope y'all still enjoy. Thank you for having stuck around to the very end here. Like I said, new internet bestie. And I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Come back around next Friday. I promise I'll be here, heck or high water. And until next time, bye.